Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Black Tower Show. I'm your host, Nathan Ford. Jake Fox is here. We're broadcasting 1310 WRSB, Brockport, New York, 1590 AM. Rochester, Canandaigua, upstate New York here, BC Studios. Our guest, again, the distinguished Webster Tarpley. We've had him on the show. If you want to know what's going on, he's the activist historian. First became widely known for his book, George Bush, the Unauthorized Biography. Webster Tarpley. Go to tarpley.net. I was just listening to him today. We're weeding out what's going on. Morsi, Syria, the Nile. We're going to break it all down here on the Black Tower Show. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Webster Tarpley.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm always glad to talk to people in your neck of the woods.
Very, very good. Here, so, as we were talking before the show started, let's break down the counter-coup that's going on in Egypt. What should people know about what's going on there?
Well, I think we have to start really with Syria, because that is what triggered the events leading to the Egyptian coup. The civil war in Syria, or it's really not a civil war, it's a war waged by foreign terrorists who have been shipped in by the U.S., the British, the Israelis, NATO, paid for by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates. All of those terrorists have been waging now for 2.5 years a kind of internal war against the Assad government. And the U.S. has been determined to overthrow Assad, and the Russian Federation and Iran are supporting Assad. What we've had in the past, 5-6 weeks, since June 5th, it's been obvious to everybody that the death squads, the terrorists, are losing this war, and they're collapsing fast, at least fast for the conditions of a conflict like that one. June 5th was the fall of Qusair. Qusair is this city sort of where Syria and northern Lebanon come together, not far from the Mediterranean. This was the main citadel and fortress and supply line base of the death squads, and that has now been, a month ago, that was liberated by the Syrian army, by Hezbollah coming in from Lebanon, and also by probably some forces from Iran, right? Maybe some people from the Revolutionary Guard of Iran. And with that, a lot of terrorists were wiped out. I have to stress that terrorists have been drawn into Syria from Chechnya, from Somalia, from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Morocco, Libya, you name it. The terrorists of all the world are there, and a lot of them are getting liquidated now, which I think is going to help the future of civilization in this part of the world. Anyway, once this city had fallen, the British and the French went wild because they regard that terrorist army fighting in Syria as their main chess piece on the Middle Eastern board. And naturally their response is they want the U.S. to intervene, to pull their chestnuts out of the fire. They're ready to fight to the last American, as always. So that's Cameron of Britain with his Foreign Secretary Haig, and President Hollande of France, and his foreign policy guy is Fabius. The French side are the Vichy, right? This is what's left over from Marshal Pétain and the French fascist regime of the 1940s. And the British, of course, that's just Colonel Blimp imperialism. So they start screaming that Obama has to do something. Now, I'm one of the greatest critics of Obama. I started attacking Obama before he got to the presidency. I attacked him during the primaries. I attacked him before the Democratic Convention in 2008. And there's just about everything wrong with Obama. But there's one thing that's right with Obama. Obama says no big war, no 1,000 bombers over Syria, no 5 divisions, no concentration of the entire U.S. Navy in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Arabian Sea, right? No, none of that. He's happy to use drones, assassinations, cyber warfare, economic sanctions, you name it, but not the big war. He's trying to end the big wars for his own benefit, right, for his own political survival, because I think he can see that the lunatic Republicans are just waiting for a chance to weaken him and impeach him, and this time throw him out of office, because they've learned something since the Clinton experience. So Obama's saying no on all of this, and I think people have to understand this. All of these stupid websites that are saying Obama is the greatest villain. No, he's not the greatest villain. There are worse villains. There's the French government, the British government, the Israelis, the neocons, and I'll tell you one other. 1 week after the fall of this city of Qusair, John Forbes Kerry of Skull and Bones, somebody who does not need lessons in evil from anybody. He's a Skull and Bones oligarch, and we all ought to know what that means by now. This is how we got, the Vietnam War, for example, or the two Gulf Wars, right? Both Bushes, Skull and Bones, and on and on and on. Skull and Bones decided they wanted to try a coup. Since Obama was saying no to an armed intervention, Obama had fought off Hillary Clinton, Panetta, and Petraeus, right, the great would-be dictator Petraeus. Last October, they had tried to get the bombing going, and Obama had said no to them. So this time, what Kerry wanted to do was to follow in the footsteps, let's say, of Kissinger in October of 1973. There was a famous case where Kissinger put the U.S. on worldwide thermonuclear alert without asking Nixon. Nixon was asleep the whole time. Kissinger did it by himself. Or, in March of 1999, Al Gore is known to have given the order to start bombing Serbia without asking Clinton, while the Russian Prime Minister Primakov was flying over the Atlantic with a peace deal that would have avoided the necessity for all this bombing. But apparently Al Gore had been told that Prince Charles wanted the bombing, and therefore he had to deliver it, and he did. So in this case, it's John Forbes Kerry goes into the Principals Committee, which is the main sort of cabinet group. It's the cabinet minus the president, always a very bad idea. So this was on the afternoon of June 12th. The Foreign Secretary of Great Britain, Haig, was lurking nearby in Washington. He was obviously part of this operation. And Kerry went in there and he said, all right, we're going to begin the bombing right away. Start bombing right now. Wait, no waiting. Fortunately, one of Obama's tame generals, this guy Dempsey, who is the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, backed up by some others, said, no, you have no plan. You don't know what you're doing. You don't even know what a no-fly zone means. You don't have any idea how long this would last. So they were able to beat him back. And this was therefore a defeat for the war faction. And I'm afraid most of our libertarian dummies have no idea, right? They can't grasp this. They are so blinded by their hatred for Obama that they can't understand what's going on. It's interesting. We have people who were blinded by hatred of Clinton. They went for Bush the Younger. Blinded by hatred of Bush the Younger, they went for Obama. Now, blinded by hatred of Obama, they're going for God knows what. And the lesson of this is that hatred is not a good guide in politics because it blinds you, and it's better not to be blinded. Anyway, after June 2nd, it looks like it's going to be very hard to get the U.S. to commit to the big bombing. What did come out of that stunt by Kerry was the verbal commitment to arm the rebels in Syria. However, the arming of the rebels has to go through Congress, and I think this is being done also by Obama in a way that will guarantee that it will fail. And I think actually now, as of this morning or yesterday, we have the conditions for it to fail. I'll tell you about that in a minute. The other thing, though, is once it got to be June 12th and you couldn't get the U.S. forces to attack, the imperialists in London, Paris especially, looked around and they said, well, who else could attack? They've always wanted Turkey to attack Syria, right? It's right there. But they can't do that now because Erdogan is scared out of his wits because he's just had a huge mass upsurge around many issues. The biggest issue in the upsurge was that people were sick and tired of having al-Qaeda terrorists coming into southern Turkey and doing kidnapping, bombing, stealing, shakedowns, bakshish, all the rest of this stuff. So Turkey was not a good candidate. And they looked around and they said, well, who might do it? And they said, Egypt. In Egypt, we have our puppet Muslim Brotherhood government, right? There's been a strategic alliance of the Muslim Brotherhood with the CIA for many, many years. And this Morsi is somebody who is trained in the U.S., right? He worked for some kind of aerospace here in the U.S., right? He's a complete American pawn. So they obviously deployed the U.S. ambassador in Egypt, is this woman Ann Patterson, to go and talk to Morsi about using the Egyptian army to attack Syria. Right. And he showed every sign that he was going to do it. And this is the famous rally in Cairo on the 15th of June, which was a monster rally, 20,000 people in an indoor hall, all hysterical, right, foaming at the mouth, top Salafis, top Al-Qaeda types, anyway, in the area, top Wahhabites, all kinds of extremists. And they're all there saying, jihad against Syria, jihad, send volunteers, Egyptians should go to Syria to fight. But it was more than that. It was also that the army was going to be sent to fight. And the army got that message. The next day, the army put out a statement saying, look, our only mission is national defense. We defend our borders. We don't go abroad looking for conflicts. At least in the last 20 years, they've stuck to that. You may remember that Bush the elder and Bush the younger wanted Egyptian troops in Afghanistan. The answer was no. Egyptian troops in Iraq. Answer was no on that one too. So they say we stay home. But I think at that point, people in the top civil service, right, the bureaucrats of the very formidable Egyptian bureaucracy and the military decided that Morsi was a public menace, so that they were not going to sit there and let him find a way to embroil Egypt in war. And what they put out, which you can read on my website, is they felt that with Morsi there was a danger that Egypt would be sucked in to the general Sunni versus Shiite war, which is the main element of U.S. foreign policy. In other words, it means Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, the Emirates, the Gulf Cooperation Council, whatever you want to call that, plus Egypt, plus Jordan, plus Libya perhaps, plus Tunisia, maybe some others, certainly Turkey would be part of this, against Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, and some others, right? So that's the U.S. approach to organizing the Middle East. So the Egyptian generals said no. So the answer to this was what I would call a counter coup. It's not a coup d'etat. The coup was a war coup coming from Morsi, and Morsi was as lawless as could be. This was not a democratic leader. He was this constitution that we're hearing so much about in Egypt. This was made up as he went along, right? He was making it up, on the fly every day. Last autumn, he put out this decree saying, I, the president, am above the law. No court can review me. I'm not subject to judicial review. Supreme Court can't judge me, and on and on and on. The main thing that he did, of course, that destroyed him politically was to sell out to the International Monetary Fund, meaning that he said, I'm going to double the price of gasoline, I'm going to remove subsidies on gasoline, I'm going to increase the sales tax, and I'm going to move towards getting rid of the key food subsidies. The main thing in Egypt is that bread is subsidized, right? The price of bread is very low. This helps the poor a great deal. This is not unsustainable. The only reason this is under pressure is because the rich, as usual, don't pay. In particular, stock speculators, derivatives mongers don't pay. But you can see what he did, right? If you double the price of gasoline in any country, you're going to get a big popular backlash against that. So that's how Morsi essentially destroyed himself. So that meant his popular support was gone. By the time we got now to June, the second half of June, the army looking at him and saying, look, we're not going to let you drag us into this lunatic war. And Morsi, more and more hysterical. The U.S. tried to save him to the very last moment, right? This is not a U.S. coup. That's why it's so encouraging. I've heard all kinds of people who think they know. They don't know. That a lot of ignorant, pessimistic people, right? One guy is a Marxist. He's got to prove Marxism. Another guy is sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood. He's got to prove that. No. The point is that this woman, Ann Patterson, the U.S. ambassador, is hated. And you can go to a number of websites, right? IntelliHub has it, among others. The signs that were shown in the demonstrations in the Cairo streets were, Morsi is Obama's bitch, he's our dictator, or another one was Obama and Patterson support terrorism, and it means Obama and the U.S. ambassador Ann Patterson support Morsi, because that terrorism means those guys, because that is really what they are. They're practically indistinguishable from these death squad characters who are fighting in Syria. And you could see that there was an alliance emerging, right? That Morsi and the Free Syrian Army, and indeed worse, the Nusra, the Emirate forces in Syria, they were converging. The thing that might also be interesting to remember is that Egypt and Syria were very recently one country. This was called the United Arab Republic, and it was from the late 50s to the early 60s under Nasser. President Nasser of Egypt, one of my personal points of reference, somebody that I have appreciated very much since the 60s already. He preached pan-Arab nationalism. In other words, that it would be good to have some kind of a political union of all Arab states. And the starting point of that was Egypt and Syria. It also included Yemen for a while, so it was getting somewhere. But then, of course, it was surrounded and crushed by the Middle East wars, right, with the help of the Israelis. But when you say to somebody in Egypt, let's go and make war against Syria, it's practically like saying, let's have a civil war inside our own country. So, fortunately, this has failed. Now, the big thing in Egypt right now is to defeat the International Monetary Fund. Unfortunately, the first nominees, right, al-Baradei is an IMF puppet, and the new prime minister is also an IMF puppet. So you got to deal with that. And I'll tell you how to do that, right? It's this guy, Hamdin Sabahi. Hamdin Sabahi is the Nasserist. He came in third in the elections last year. Morsi was first, the army guy was second, and then the Nasserist Sabahi. So this is not a utopia. I'm not saying, I want some workers' party or Islamic party of purity. No, I'm saying there is deeply rooted in Egypt and demonstrably present an alternative, which is this guy Sabahi. And his line is, no to the IMF, no to the Muslim Brotherhood, no to neoliberalism, no to these obscurantists. And he said, let's have a Tahrir tax. Let's have a 10% one-time tax on everybody's fortune if you're above $7 million, 50 million Egyptian pounds. And he's got an economic bill of rights, which is basically, it's practically the same thing as Franklin D. Roosevelt's economic bill of rights of January 1944. So all of this is going on. The last thing in the big picture is this. Yesterday, a top commander of the Free Syrian Army, that is to say the moderate terrorists, right, the moderate cannibals, the ones that Obama says he wants to arm, was assassinated by an extremist of the same group. In other words, the Free Syrian Army is the pro-Western puppets. Then you have the Nusra, which is Al-Qaeda, and then you have an even more extreme Al-Qaeda, which is called the Islamic Emirate of Iraq and the Levant. The Levant meaning, the Eastern Mediterranean, Lebanon, Syria, places like this. Israel would be part of the Levant too, at least historically. So the emir of the coast, that's this guy's title, killed one of the top members of the military council of the Free Syrian Army. The Free Syrian Army is what you've seen with this guy Salim Idris, General Idris, the golden boy of the CIA, interviewed on Western media, written about in the New York Times and the Washington Post. So the point is now, though, that you've got the death squads are fighting Assad and Hezbollah. That's one front. But now the death squads are actually killing each other. And the upshot of all that is, if you're in the U.S. Congress, you're going to be asked to vote for funding to give advanced weapons, U.S. taxpayer dollars, to give advanced weapons to these Syrian terrorists or semi-terrorists, whatever you want to call them. And you can see that there is no guarantee, because all you have to do is say, well, I have a great pro-Western moderate terrorist here. I'm going to give him some of these Stinger missiles that can shoot down airplanes. But then along comes the Islamic Emirate of Iraq and the Levant. They kill your guy, take the stuff, and then start shooting down Turkish or European or other airliners, right? And then the Congress is going to be responsible for that. So I would hope that as a result of the events of the last couple of days, and it is the front page of the Washington Post here, rebel leader is killed in Syria. That's the top headline. I hope it's going to become impossible for the U.S. Congress to vote for these death squads, right? That we don't want one penny, not one bullet, not one penny, not one, anything goes to these killers. And if that is done, I'm relatively confident that the rebellion in Syria will be practically over by October, November. In other words, they'll be crushed. They'll be wiped out. And with them will go a large part of the terrorists in the world. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. Those terrorists could surrender. They could just get out of there and go home. They could throw down their guns and run away. Those would all be smart things. But since that's not likely, probably a lot of them are going to get eliminated, right? They're going to be liquidated. And again, this is not the worst possible outcome. So in that sense, Assad is the front line of civilization, like it or not. So I think that's more or less the overview.
We're speaking with Webster Tarpley on the Black Tower Show, activist, historian, philosopher of history who seeks to provide the programs and strategies needed to overcome the current world crisis, and we are breaking down this crisis right now.
Economic matters. How vulnerable is the NHS right now that the hedge fund guys have it in their sights?
The what?
The NHS. Cameron is going to allow all these hedge fund guys to pick apart the NHS. And I don't know, the
British National Health Service?
Yeah.
Cameron is an austerity ghoul. Cameron is a bringer of genocidal austerity, and one of the things they want to target is the British National Health Service, which has a lot of problems, but it's obviously much better than nothing. It means that everybody gets some access to some kind of care, even though the delays are long and it's not ideal. It was built with Malthusian criteria from the very beginning. I don't know why you picked this out of all the world, right? Why this should be the thing. The main point is we have a world economic depression. It is similar to the 1930s. It is in many ways worse than the 1930s, and it's getting worse. Europe is obviously in a chronically depressed situation. The United States is in a chronically depressed situation. Japan is in an even longer depressed situation, and they're trying some very high-risk, hot money, and competitive devaluation strategies to get themselves out of the depression that they're in. But it's being made harder because China, Brazil, and a number of other places like this are rapidly slowing. They're slowing down at a significant pace. So what we're looking at is that the entire world is lurching into a downward leg of the depression. We've been in the depression since September 2008 at the very latest, but things are getting worse. So therefore, the question I would think is, what do you do about this? And I would point to two main policy things, and then maybe one or two others. The first thing is the Wall Street sales tax. If you want to stabilize the federal budget and budgets at all levels, states, cities, municipalities, you have to realize that the U.S. fiscal crisis is caused by the fact that Wall Street pays no taxes. They pay nothing. They don't pay corporate income tax. General Electric, which is a hedge fund, has found a way to even have a negative tax rate. In other words, the federal government pays them more than they don't pay anything. Right? It's a net cash flow from the federal government to General Electric based on being a hedge fund. GE Capital is the heart of that company, and they do it with colluding between Immelt and Obama. So they don't pay corporate income tax, and above all, they don't pay sales tax. Right? There are quadrillions, thousands of trillions of dollars that go through the Chicago derivatives pits and Wall Street also that simply don't pay anything. So the obvious baseline bedrock measure you need is a Wall Street sales tax, and that would be 1% on every transaction. For the people who want to, they got their concerns about their retirement investments and so forth. Fine, have a $1 million exclusion for every person. So it would be, $2 million for a family of two if it comes to that. You can trade up to $2 million back and forth without paying the tax. But after that, I'm sorry, then you're getting into the area of pretty heavy-duty trading. So then you should pay your 1%. That 1% would level the playing field so that speculation would no longer be so attractive compared to real production. It would restore the attractiveness of real production in the entire economy, and I think help to bring about an economic recovery in its own right. But the main thing it would do is that you would then have plenty of money for your Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, rollback to sequester, Head Start, Pell Grants, WIC, right, protein meals for children, the entire panoply of what you need to maintain your labor force while you're getting out of the Depression. Now, that's not yet a recovery. The recovery is the second step. You've got the Federal Reserve, and they spend almost $100 billion every month buying bankrupt, cancerous, kited derivatives, what they call mortgage-backed securities. Those are derivatives. So they see their main function in life as maintaining the price of rotten, insolvent derivatives. What we should do is, and this could be done by a phone call if you had enough power behind it, since the Federal Reserve operates in total illegality, right? They don't do things according to public laws, but they have a clique of bankers who run the show. If you could generate enough pressure on those bankers around Bernanke on that board, you could say to them, look, you opened a $27 trillion credit line for Wall Street hedge fund hyenas, zombie bankers, parasites, lampreys, and others during the hot phase of the financial crisis, 08, 09, especially. What you're going to do now, Bernanke, is you're going to open a credit facility. You're going to have a credit stimulus similar to what you had for these banks, what they still have for AIG, for example. And what you're going to do with that, though, is you're going to buy bonds from states and municipalities, counties, Port Authority of New York, things like that, and you're going to rebuild the entire infrastructure. The first tranche could be 3.6 trillion, maybe make it a nice round 4 trillion, which is the amount estimated by the American Society of Civil Engineers to get the U.S. infrastructure from D plus to C. So just to be mediocre, to have a C, you'd have to spend almost $4 trillion. But if you do that, you could begin then, once you saw the effect of that, you would see that that is the royal road to a recovery. And then you could simply do that repeatedly, right? Again, if the Federal Reserve was willing to commit $27 trillion to zombie banks, and this includes foreign zombie banks in 2008, 2009, how about, 5 trillion, 10 trillion, 15 trillion, whatever it takes, frankly, to actually have an economic recovery? We would need 30 million new productive jobs. The entire infrastructure of this country is at the point of physical collapse. We see it again and again, right? We've seen bridges falling down. We've seen train crashes. We've seen now the system there in the San Francisco airport. One of the landing systems was knocked out when this crash occurred. Similar things going on all over the United States, right? You got to basically rebuild all your water systems, your rail, your road, your water systems, canals, ports, electrical grids, housing, and public buildings.
I think it's good when you say credit.
The WPA.
Yeah, I like when you say credit too, because to some degree, like, the money seems to have is this part of money losing its value in a sense? Is that we're just creating money out of thin air, essentially? Don't
worry about money. Worry about production. Economics is about production. You've got to produce use values, right? Human beings are creatures of needs. There's a dose of food, clothing, shelter, transportation, energy, right? These are the things you ought to worry about, right? Don't worry about money.
You have to pay people money to work.
Yeah, fine, but from a government point of view, you can generate all the money you want. That's not the problem. It's what do you do with it? And what we've seen so far is hot money recovery. Bernanke puts out this money, and he gives it exclusively to banks, only to parasites. And they send it out to the hottest speculative market in the world, and it doesn't get you anywhere. So out of the ones that have been done so far, right, Pelosi and the stimulus was a Keynesian consumer-led recovery. Now, that was better than hot money. That had beneficial effects that kept the U.S. going for another year or year and a half. But unfortunately, it does not produce a permanent recovery. If you want to produce a permanent recovery, you've got to revive capital goods production, not consumer spending.
Well, they don't want a recovery then. Is that what you're saying?
They don't know what they want. In other words, they want money for their clienteles, sure. And basically the Democratic Party has a an animus against production, but the Republican Party has an animus against maintaining the social safety net. And worst of all are the Ron Paul libertarians, because their program is an immediate, all-out deflationary crash, the Andrew Mellon method: liquidate stocks, liquidate bonds, liquidate real estate, liquidate the farmer, liquidate everything, and then there'll be a recovery. And of course, the comeback to that is too bad if you died in the process, because a lot of people won't live to see that recovery. And of course, there is no evidence that there will be a recovery. This mythical thing that they talk about has never occurred. It's never happened that way. They call the Panic of 1920, they claim. Panic of 1920 brought you fascism in Italy and other places, right? So there are things that are just beyond the Kennedys people. But the libertarians are the absolute worst. The hot money people are also very bad. The Keynesian is slightly better, but ultimately it fails in the end. And what's left is the American system, the Hamiltonian, Henry Carey, Friedrich List, Abraham Lincoln method, Franklin D. Roosevelt, certainly too. And that would be force the Federal Reserve to buy $4 trillion of 100-year bonds at a 0% coupon from the states and the cities, and start, building the transcontinental maglev railway, start building, rebuilding the canal system, right? Where you guys are, you don't need to be told about canals, right? The entire upstate New York is a product of just one significant canal system. That could all be could be redone, and it can be redone, with rail and everything else modern. And that's an imperative, because if you don't do that, the U.S. is at the point of thermodynamic collapse, right? When things begin, you get chain reaction collapses of the main industrial things. And this is what nobody thinks about, right? No libertarian ever thinks, what if there's no food to be bought, or what if there are no trained workers? So I think that's those two things. Now, specifically, the leading edge of one of these, which I'd like to point to, is this student loan issue, right? Senator Elizabeth Warren, backed by her friend Tierney, congressman from Massachusetts, they have this proposal, the Bank on Students Act, which is, don't let the rate go from 3.4 to 6.8, which is where it is now since July 1st, but rather get it down to 0.75. And how can you do that? You can do that without borrowing money, without taxing anybody, without cutting anybody's existing funding. Yeah. You do that you say to Bernanke, guess what, Bernanke, you're a creature of Congress, and you're going to do what we say, and this bill says the Federal Reserve will make available unlimited funds at the interest rate of 0.75 through the discount window. And this is a clever trick, right? If a zombie banker who's bankrupt with derivatives can come and borrow money at 0.75%, then of course a student ought to be able to get at least as good a deal. And some people find that absolutely heretical. I think that's elementary justice. So unfortunately, I find it amazing that there are not mass strikes by students. I'm hoping that there will be when the academic year begins, right? People should get out there and have demonstrations on campus for the 0.75, nothing else. Because you have the House Republicans want to raise the rate sky high and make it float. Obama wants to raise it almost as much. There's a compromise proposal to go back to 3.4. This is not good enough. 0.75 is not even ideal, but it's the best in town, and it's paid for by the Federal Reserve. And that idea that you can get an economic recovery and make the Federal Reserve pay for it is the key thing. Because people normally say, oh, no, we can't do it now because we can't borrow more money, right? We can't spend more on the federal budget. That's right. You're going to need the federal budget for your social safety net, right? Social security and so forth. But you have this other thing, right? You have the Federal Reserve, which is a completely separate accounting unit, and that money doesn't come from taxation. That money is printed. It comes out of nowhere. And that's a tremendous advantage, right? That's the inherent power of the modern state. The credit-creating power of the U.S. government has been hijacked by the Federal Reserve. A real president could call up Bernanke and say, Ben, either you you issue a statement this afternoon that you're going to buy $4 trillion worth of bonds, or I have the 82nd Airborne Division here, and they're going to come and visit you, or something to this line. That's what General de Gaulle would have done and actually did do it on one or two occasions.
Now that's an ultimatum right there.
Yeah, an ultimatum.
All right, well,
because what they do is completely illegal.
Well, it takes someone at a very high level to make that decision. I mean, how do you change the hearts and minds of that critical person? Of course, you wonder, as students become more and more in debt, they're less likely to organize, to start an uprising. So as we because it's more unstable, we're so scared of falling apart.
No, you're too pessimistic. Look here, then that's what you were asking me about at the beginning, right? What's the spirit of the age, right? The spirit of the age is there's a new mass strike upsurge in the making, right? And if they can do it in Turkey, if they can do it in Brazil, and if they can do it in Egypt, you're telling me that it can't be done here, that this population is exhausted, effete, decadent, degenerate, I don't know what, totally cretinized, totally, autistic, I don't know what.
I think we are exhausted. There is an exhaustion. That's exactly what it is.
But look, history also shows that moments when that seemed to be the case are often the immediate prelude to explosive events that go in the opposite direction. In other words, a population that has been trodden upon by its own government for decades, at a certain juncture, some trifling incident that has been done 100 times before suddenly seems to be intolerable, and all of a sudden the streets are full of howling people. The question, I have no doubt that's coming. The question is, who's going to have the program and the leadership and the hegemony? Who's going to provide leadership in that moment? Now, if you look right now, it's going to be Noam Chomsky, Amy Goodman, Michael Moore, and this absolutely guarantees defeat. That means you're lost. That means the end of civilization. So I think people have got to sweep aside this deadwood, right, these people. We look at Occupy, right? What did they gain? Nothing. Compare Occupy to the Tea Party. The Tea Party got 75 people in the House, 6 or so senators, a number of governors, any number of state legislators. What did Occupy get? Nothing. And they had no demands, and they made a fetish of having no demands. Now, you look at what just happened.
Infiltration now, yeah. I mean, of course.
No, I'm talking about the leadership at what was called Adbusters of Vancouver, British Columbia, and the sociologist David Graeber, who were running these things. In other words, the whole Occupy had a leadership that was heavily in the orbit of NATO intelligence, right? And this was a controlled opposition at the top. The idea that it was an anarchist pipe dream, right? That you'd essentially have no demands, but you would camp in the park, and that eventually the entire society would join you in the park. That's an anarchist fairy tale left over from the 19th century. It has never happened. Compare it to Brazil. In Brazil, you had this upsurge around resentment over the Olympics and the soccer championships and things that were going on, and all the money going into stadiums. They had demands, and they won a lot of their demands. They said, we want the bus system and the train system to either be heavily discounted or free. We want special passes, right? Special discounts. We want more money for social development. And they won actual concessions. So they can now say, our method works. If you look at the Occupy method, you ask somebody, well, you were out there, for a month vociferating and agitating. What do you have to show for it?
It did inform, though. There was informative quality to it. I mean, people did start to learn about
It's crazy. Nobody needs to be informed of this stuff. People are radicalized by objective economic conditions, and the radicalization is not your job. Radicalization, there's no way you can do it. Radicalization occurs through the actions of the crisis. What you have to be ready to do is to say, I'm going to lead you. I have a program. I know what to do. Follow me. This is the way. Because otherwise, the NATO agents will be there in droves.
So
right? And they were there in droves.
The Tea Party is something that people should get behind? Do you think the Tea Party is the Tea Party?
The Tea Party is the most lunatic. I'm just trying to say, even with a lunatic, Ron Paul. Yeah, but they were able to get 75 people into Congress with a program of let's go cut our own throats. Where suppose Occupy had come out saying, If Occupy had said, we have one demand, we want the Wall Street sales tax, and we want it now, and we're calling on Congress to pass this, and we want it passed, and that means no austerity, no killer cuts, no more austerity cuts, Wall Street is going to pay, and we want that passed. You essentially hold that knife to the throat of the Congress, and you say, we're not leaving until this is passed. That could have been passed by Christmas of 2011, I guess it was, right? And then you would have had a permanent gain rather than nothing.
All right, I like it. I'm on board. You had your fight against austerity, and that was in New York, right?
I'm part of the United Front Against Austerity, which is part of a continuous, ongoing fight. What do you mean?
I mean, your last event. When's the next event so people can go out?
Yeah, look, you should go to our website, UFAA, right, Against Austerity. We've been doing mobilizations. We went to the inauguration around the Wall Street sales tax. We got that on CNN. Go and see the interesting pictures of how we got on CNN against the will of the CNN producers. And then more recently, since May, it's been the Elizabeth Warren 0.75%. Because again, it's not just the obvious need and justice of cutting the rate on student loans. It's that the Federal Reserve is being forced to pay. It's a partial nationalization of the Federal Reserve. And all of these libertarian fakers, right, the Ron Paul, Rand Paul school of fakery, they're so upset about the Federal Reserve and all this other stuff. So fine. So here's an actual concrete measure that says force the Federal Reserve to act in the public interest. And what do they say? Oh no, 0.75% violates the Austrian school. Well, I'm sorry. I looked in the Constitution. I don't see the Austrian school. I'm not aware that Alexander Hamilton was from Austria or Abraham Lincoln or Roosevelt. No, not from Austria. So these people go back to Austria, right?
You have a heart, Tarpley. You got it. You got the heart, man. I like that. There's a little. You're a moralist, aren't you? There should be some morality there.
Try to be guided by moral values, but not in the sense of.
Well, it's right to do what you're saying.
Extremism, because this has to be it has to be rooted in practicality. In other words, it cannot be a complete utopia.
No,
in other words, we're not talking about a radical reform of human nature. We're not talking about some artificial golden age. That stuff is dangerous. You don't want to get into that. You want to say, essentially, the existing society can and must be saved with these adjustments, which are really not
but you're saying that is right. That's a right thing to do when we demand money from that tax.
Yeah, but what is right? Look, right and wrong can be economically defined. In other words, the right is what you need to develop your labor force and your standard of living and your level of employment and your high capital intensity, high energy intensity production. So that is what is right. In other words, the content of civilization has got to be saturated with these ideas of economic development, because without economic development, it's very difficult to distinguish right and wrong. You can go into some place in the third world and say, there should be democracy here. And then the answer is, well, the people are living on 2,000 calories a day. How can democracy occur? It can't. There has to be a material basis, a basis in production, employment, and standard of living, longevity, health services, and so forth. And, of course, the public health system, you can only have a public health system if you have an advanced industrial society. That is what history has shown. Before you get to an advanced industrial society, you can't have longevity of the type that we have now. So if you want to do that, you better keep or restore an advanced industrial society, because what we have right now is a post-industrial service economy junkyard rubble heap. And that doesn't work. So the whole Malthusian experiment is a failure.
Webster Griffin Tarpley on the Black Tower Show. Thank you so much for talking to us. We'd love to have you back on again.
Great. Please keep up with me at tarpley.net, and Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. These days things happen fast. Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed is the way to get a good line on these.
How many people, when you have United Front Against Austerity and you have these events? I mean, how many people are at these events? And I mean, what is the support?
I wouldn't measure the events, right? Because these people are scattered all over the U.S., right? So but there are quite a number of people who do these things, and they do them part time. Take a look at the United Front Against Austerity on Twitter. Take a look at the Facebook page. Take a look at the website, and we have a special department that does memes. We have a very popular meme of the Wall Street sales tax. We do a lot of work with this little guy from the Monopoly set, right? The little capitalist with the high silk hat, and similar things. So we're trying to act on the culture, but also we're looking to intervene in specific situations. Take, for example, the fast food strike recently, or we're backing candidates. Let's talk about that for a second. Randy Credico running for mayor of New York, and it looks like he got on the ballot. New York City. Randy Credico is going for the Wall Street sales tax. Since it's the city, he says a 0.5% Wall Street sales tax. That's fine. The other half can go to Albany, but half of it can go to New York City in this case. And of course, this means that there is no budget problem in New York, right? The budget problem in New York is
bodyguards. Does he have bodyguards? This guy.
Yeah, you guys, you're a pessimist. I can hear it, right? You're taking counsel of your fears at every turn. Here's another one. In New Jersey, we have Willie Araujo, Araujo, running for governor of New Jersey. Also, Wall Street sales tax. So if the people in Wall Street say to New York City, "Hey, you can't tax us. We'll go to New Jersey," the answer is don't kid yourself, boys. Not so fast. There's going to be a Wall Street sales tax in New Jersey. So I would urge you guys to dedicate yourself to a coherent line on these things. Right? You should be fighting for the Warren-Tierney bill to cut the student loan rates down to 0.75%. Yeah, but you got to campaign. It's not enough to have a verbal position, right? A throwaway line. Right? It takes a commitment, right? That you got to hammer away, right? You got to fight it out on this line all summer, as was once said, and similar things, right? The thing about New York State that people are surprised with is there is a Wall Street sales tax, which would bring not as much as I would want, but $30 billion a year. It's on the books, right? It's in the New York State Code. But under Governor Carey in the late 70s, Wall Street successfully blackmailed Albany so that the tax is remitted. In other words, it's not collected. New York State is not getting the benefit of the tax that's on the books. And that tax has survived court challenges. It is constitutional. It is fine. And you could simply say, enforce the law, right? End this exception for the Wall Street parasites, hedge fund hyenas, and so forth. And they'll always say we're going someplace else. They're going nowhere. New York is so big, they want to exploit it. They can't go someplace else. There's no place big enough to exploit at that level.
Actually, hopeful talking to you, Tarpley. Thank you. I actually feel great. I'm inspired. I'm going to go out there. Ladies and gentlemen, we just talked to Webster Tarpley. Thanks so much.
It's called the pessimism of the intelligence and the optimism of the will.
Optimism of the will.
I like that.
Yeah, the pessimism of the intelligence and the optimism of the will. In other words, the situation is grim, but there's always a way to do something.
Amen. Amen, Webster Tarpley. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
All right, take
See
care.
you soon.
All right,
bye-bye.